Okay, welcome to week 4, and our topic for this week is going to be backdrops and sprites in Scratch. So today's May 7th, and as I said before, our topic is backdrops and sprites in Scratch. Our objective this week, you guys are going to get some practice designing computer graphics in Scratch. So our essential question is, how can graphics enhance a digital project? For example, like a video game. And our goals for this week are to start off by reviewing our key vocabulary. We are going to demo some of the graphic design tools in Scratch and discuss assignment number 2, expectations. Your homework for this week or your assignments are number 1 and number 2 in Google Classroom, which I'm going to go over in this video lesson. So we're going to start off by reviewing some vocabulary. This is a term that I mentioned in our last Scratch lesson. I guess it was the week before last. And the word I want everybody to become really familiar with this week is graphic. And really, graphic is a word you've probably heard a lot. You might have used it whenever you refer to maybe your favorite video games. You might have talked about the graphics of a game before and how you liked them or you disliked them. But graphic, the term, refers to any image in a digital project. And a graphic could be an image of words. This is called typography, right? So the font and the way words are laid out on a screen. A graphic could be a photograph. A graphic could be something that an artist, generates on a computer or paints or draws. Or it could just be something like a simple little cartoon character. All of those refer to graphics or images that could be used in a digital project. A digital project could be something like a video game, it could be a website, it could be any number of things, but a graphic just basically refers to an image, okay? And so a career that is involved with this is something called graphic design. And this is basically the art and profession of selecting and arranging different visual elements, elements being parts, visual meaning the things that you see with your eyes, such as we said before, typography, images, symbols, and colors. All right. So whenever you go to a website, the way everything is arranged on that page is usually the work of a graphic designer. Whenever you play a video game, the different elements of that video game, part of that work comes down to graphic design, people who actually think about how those visual elements come together and how they're presented. So think for a minute about how graphic design might add or take away from a game. On the screen, I've put a pretty popular example of like Super Mario Brothers, right? So whenever I first started playing, whenever I was a kid, younger than you, this is what Mario looked like. And graphics back then were kind of rough, right? Today, Mario looks a little bit more like this. So graphic design can really add to games and make them, in some cases, a more enjoyable experience, more realistic. Think about your favorite video game and think about the graphic style of that game. It might not be realistic, but maybe it's just an art style that you really enjoy or you think looks really cool. All of that's important with graphic design. So with our last lesson, the week before last, we learned some new terms for Scratch, and these terms are going to come into play this week for your assignment. The first one we're going to talk about is a backdrop. And if you remember from that last Scratch lesson, a backdrop is a graphic, or remember we said a graphic is an image that's displayed as a background on your stage. So backdrops are just images that we put on the stage to serve as scenery or kind of a background to what's going on in your project. We also learned in that lesson what a sprite was, and a sprite is a graphic on the stage that can be programmed. So it's different from a backdrop because a backdrop is just kind of there. It's almost like it's glued on the stage. But a sprite can be programmed, which means that we can give it instructions to do things like move, make sounds, talk, all kinds of stuff, right? A sprite doesn't have to be a character. A sprite could be any graphic design element. It could be a symbol, it could be an object, it could be typography or letters. It can be all different types of things. But a sprite is something that we put on our stage that we want to do something. A costume, last term that we're going to talk about, would refer to the different appearances of a sprite. Okay, so you can have one sprite that might have more than one look to it. And video game designers might use costumes in a game in order to give a sprite the illusion that it is moving, right? So if you look at these two costumes for Scratch Cat, one, he has his legs tucked up underneath him, and one, his legs are stretched out. And if you can imagine, if we were switching back and forth between these two costumes, it would give the appearance that Scratch Cat was walking, right? His legs and arms would be moving back and forth, making it look like he was walking. So oftentimes costumes are just different versions of the same looking sprite, but they don't have to be. Costumes can look completely different from each other. It just depends on what you're using them for. We'll learn more about those later. But a costume is just different appearances that a sprite can take on. So those are our big terms that we need to remember for this week. We're going to go ahead and jump into Google Classroom and talk about your assignments for this week. So first, let's talk about assignment number 1, which is going to be, like we have done in previous weeks, a short quiz, 5 questions, multiple choice, just reviewing the vocabulary that we just talked about today. Once you can complete that quiz, you can move on to assignment number 2. And assignment number 2 is going to take a bit more time. I've included quite a few resources for assignment number 2, and I want to go over each of these and talk about how you use them. So let's look at the instructions first. It says, for this assignment, you will explore graphic design in Scratch by trying out 3 different methods for adding graphics, backdrops, and sprites to your project. Attached, you will find a checklist for the assignment, along with a video that shows you how to find your saved work after a session and how to turn a project in. For help using the tools in Scratch, along with instructions for completing the assignment, please see this week's video lesson, which you are watching right now. You've got 3 things here. The first thing is a checklist that's going to tell you what to do in order to complete assignment number 2. We'll look at that in a second. And I've included 2 resources here. I have a video that shows you how to turn in your assignment whenever you're done with it. Okay, so once you complete this checklist, you can hop over here to see how to turn your assignment in here on Google Classroom. And the other one is, let's say that you want to split up your work for this assignment over a couple of days, because remember, you have until Monday at midnight to turn this in on time. You can, I show you in this video how to find your work that you've already started in Scratch. One thing that I want to tell you about Scratch right off the bat is that it automatically saves your work, a lot like Tinkercad, so you don't have to worry about constantly saving it and backing it up. It'll do that for you consistently every time you're working on it. So if you make a change, Scratch is going to save that for you automatically. Okay, so let's get into the checklist for this assignment. Now, for this assignment, I'm going to make the theme Under the Sea. Okay, so everybody's projects that you're creating for this assignment, I want you to think about it as being an underwater scene, all right? And that's just for this first project. I'm giving you this theme just to make it so that I know everybody's going to be able to find what they need where they need to find it. So your theme is going to be Under the Sea. Okay, so the very first thing that you're going to have to do is I want you to think about an underwater scene. And I want you to think about it in terms of a backdrop or some scenery that would be in the background of your stage. And I want you to think about it in terms of a sprite, something that would be doing something in your underwater scene. All right, so for this, to make it easy for you, I want you to picture an underwater scene, and then I want you to picture some sort of sea creature that might live in that underwater scene. Okay, so if you guys look here, and you can do this too on a piece of scratch paper, you can kind of sketch out what your idea is. So for me, you guys can see in the top picture right here, I sketched out some sand with some seaweed growing out of it. I have some water up above it and some little bubbles that are here, right? That would be my backdrop or my underwater scene that I want to create. And then for my sprite or my creature that lives underwater and does something, I selected for myself an octopus. But you might choose to do something else, like a fish or a seahorse or a dolphin or a whale or whatever. If you want to, you could even pick something like a treasure chest or a submarine or I don't know, whatever you're thinking. But you want to have an object that lives under the water that does something. Okay, so this is what I want you to kind of envision before you start your project. And it helps if you sketch it out on a sheet of paper. Okay, so this is where your project starts. And once you have an idea, you can go ahead and get started on your checklist. So let's look. So it says backdrops and sprites and scratch checklist. Okay, so it says the first thing that we're going to do is title the assignment first name, last name, number one. So if we go to Scratch, we first want to make sure that we are logged in. If you have not yet created an account for Scratch, please look at week 2 for instructions on how to do that. You'll know you're logged in whenever you see your screen name here in the top right-hand corner. All right, so to create a new project, we're going to go to the top left and we're going to look for the button that says Create, and we're going to click it one time. And when we do that, it might take a few moments to load it, but it's going to open up to the Scratch programming environment. And like we discussed last time, we've got our stage over here. You can see that the project starts off with a little scratch cat here in a very plain backdrop. All right. To title our project, to complete checklist item number 1, title the assignment first name, last name, number 1. If you look at the top center of your page, you'll see it should say Untitled 1 or something like that. All you have to do is click on it, and you can go ahead and backspace to delete it. And we're going to title it first name, last name, number 1. Okay, so I called mine Katie Delp 1, and you'll call yours your first name, your last name, and 1. All right. Now, the next instruction says to paint a backdrop using the paint tools in Scratch and call it backdrop number 1. Okay, so you can see here that we have a really, really plain white backdrop. All right, but remember that we want to make ours an underwater themed backdrop. All right, and I have my little sketch here to serve as my inspiration. So what I'm going to do is, first thing I'm going to get rid of Scratch Cat. And to do that, all I really have to do is click this little garbage can in the top left-hand corner of his icon down here. That'll go ahead and get rid of him because we're not going to have Scratch Cat in this project. We're going to be doing other things. So backdrop. I want to paint a new backdrop and call it backdrop 1. I want it to be under the sea themed. So whenever I hover my mouse over this button right here where it says backdrops, all right, in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see that different little buttons pop up. If I hover my mouse over each of these buttons, it gives me different options for how I can create the backdrop. So I can upload one, I can come up with a surprise, I can paint one, or I can choose one. Now, if you remember, this item on the checklist said that I'm going to paint one. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the paintbrush icon. And you'll see that this area over here is going to switch, and it is going to turn into what looks kind of like a painting application, okay? So I'm going to name it. You'll see right here, I already have one that says backdrop 1. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of backdrop 2. So I'm just working with backdrop number 1. See the names right there. And I'm going to use the tools that are available to paint the underwater scene with me. One of the things I'm going to do first, and this might be a little bit confusing, but it's kind of a rule you just have to learn. You learn it through experience, but I'm going to make it easy for you and tell you right off the bat. Whenever you are painting in Scratch or creating something, that's completely your original idea, you always want to do it in what's called bitmap mode. It's going to make it a much easier experience and a lot less frustrating. So if you look down here, you'll see a button that says convert to bitmap. You want to convert to bitmap. So I suggest that you click that button right there. Now, when you first open it up, it's going to be in vector mode, but you want to switch to bitmap. If you want to go back to vector mode, you can click that button again, but you want to keep it in bitmap. Just trust me on this. It's going to make it a lot easier for you. So now you can see that my controls or my little buttons that I have here are a lot more simple, and that might not seem like a good thing, but I promise it is for painting. All right. So I'm going to work on using the tools to create the underwater scene that I envisioned in my little sketch right here. So I'm going to start off by using this tool right here, the paintbrush, which allows me just to draw freestyle. I can also choose colors in Scratch. And if you look up here, this square, it's going to start off as purple, but I can change color, all right, by sliding this back and forth. I can choose how saturated a color is, so how rich it is by sliding this back and forth. It can be weak or very, very rich. And I can also change the brightness of a color by moving this one back and forth, right? So I'm going to adjust the color. I'm going to make it brown for sand. And I'm going to go ahead and draw my underwater floor. all right, by just drawing a line across the bottom. Now, I could take this pen and I could color this in, you know, as if this were a crayon, but that's going to take a really long time. So in order to color in underneath this line, I'm going to use the fill. This one looks like a paint bucket. I'm going to go ahead and click under that line one time just to fill it in automatically. So that works really, really quickly, right? Um, now keep in mind, if you use this tool, it's only going to color inside of lines. So if I don't have a line that goes the whole way across, the color is going to color, you know, the entire area. So you have to make sure that your line goes the whole way from one side of the stage to the other with no breaks in it. All right. Next, I want to maybe color the water that's above the sand. So I want to make a blue color. Maybe I'll adjust the brightness and the saturation a little bit. I like that color. And I'll use the paint bucket again to color this area up here blue. Now, something cool that you can do with your paint bucket is you can use different types of fill effects. So you'll notice when I have the paint bucket selected and I click on my color, I have these options up here. And these allow you to mix different colors and gradients to just to have some like kind of cool effects. So you actually can pick two colors. So I'm going to pick a light blue and a darker blue like that. Just by selecting the different colors, I can adjust them a little bit. And I can see a preview of what it's going to look like up there. And now whenever I fill it, it's going to have a cool gradient effect where it goes from one color into another color. Okay, so I have those elements done. Let me look back at my sketch. Now that I have the water and the sand, I'm going to make some seaweed. So I'm going to go back here. I think for this one, I'm going to I use my brush tool again, but I don't want to use a skinny line. I want to make that line a little bit thicker. So whenever I select the paintbrush, you'll see there's a number over here to the right. I can increase that number. I'm going to make it, and I can click like that, or else I can just type in a number. I'm going to make it 50. And I'm going to select a green color, really nice seaweedy green. I'm going to go ahead and paint some seaweed. Okay, so we've got it on one side. I'll put some seaweed on the other side. Okay, now I have my seaweed. The last part of my picture were the bubbles. So these bubbles are like perfect circles. So I have two shape tools here. One is a circle shape and one is a rectangle shape. I'm going to use a circle shape for the bubbles. And I have two options here. I can make my bubbles filled or just an outline. I think for my bubbles, because they're see-through, I'm just going to have them be an outline. And I get to choose the outline color. So I'm going to make it maybe a dark blue. And I also get to choose the thickness, right? The higher the number, the thicker the line is going to be. So I'm going to make it kind of thin. We'll make it 10. And then I can just click and drag my mouse to create little bubbles. I'll make some bubbles around my screen like this. Okay. So if I look over here, pretty close to what I originally envisioned, I have created my first backdrop by using the paint tools in Scratch. Okay, so the first two are done. The next one is to select a backdrop from the Scratch library and edit it if necessary, call it backdrop 2. Okay, so now for this part, I get to add another backdrop. Now there's two different places I can do it. I can add a new backdrop using this button over here that we used for the first one, or now I've got a button over here where I can choose a different backdrop. And I want to add it from the library. So for this one, what I'm actually looking to do is choose a backdrop. And whenever I click on this little magnifying glass to choose a backdrop, Scratch has actually created a library of different backdrops that you can use for all kinds of different projects. So they have all of these images they've already created for you to use in your projects. They've also categorized them up here across the top, and you can see that they have a category for underwater. So I could go through and scroll through all of them to try to find one, or I could make it easy on myself by just clicking underwater, and you'll see they have 2 underwater backdrops. All right. They both look pretty cool. I'm going to select this one right here because I'm going to show you some cool things you can do with it. Okay, so I just double clicked on it to add it. And it takes a second to load there, but there you can see it. I'm going to call it backdrop 2 because that's what the instructions tell me to do. And here we have our backdrop from the Scratch library, and it looks pretty good. Now, if you remember last time when we were painting our backdrop, I told you to convert it to bitmap mode. But this time, we're not creating one. We're taking one from the library and we're going to edit a little bit. So we do not want to convert to bitmap mode. This time we want to keep it in vector mode because what this allows us to do is separate the image into different layers, and we can move things around and change them and do all kinds of cool stuff. So do not click the button for this one. We want to be able to edit something from the library. So if you look back at my sketch, this looks a little bit different than my sketch does. It has a little bit more going on. So I'm going to show you some cool stuff you can do. In vector mode, you have some additional options here. So in addition to the stuff we saw with the last one, we now have the option to select and also reshape things. So select tool allows you to actually click on different parts of the project. And again, you can only do this with objects from the library. And you can click on them and drag them to move them around. Okay, pretty cool, right? You can click on them and hit the backspace key or the garbage can up here to delete them. Okay, you can click on an object and you can group and ungroup objects. So if you look at this piece of seaweed right here, you'll see it's also attached to the starfish and the rocks, right? So just like in Tinkercad where we would group and ungroup objects whenever we were making designs, you can group and ungroup things in Scratch. So if I click ungroup here, it has ungrouped it from the bottom. I'm going to do it again because there's multiple objects that are grouped together. You can see I've separated the seaweed from everything else. So what I'm going to do is, now that I have that seaweed, I'm going to start deleting other objects that don't really fit in my project. Oh, I didn't want to get rid of that. So I can actually go up here and click the undo button. Let me ungroup this. And I'll get rid of some of these bigger ones maybe. Okay, and I'm just hitting the backspace key to delete them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 big seaweeds like I have in my picture I envisioned. And what I'm going to do now, because I also have these options, is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste another one. I'm going to move it over here to this side. Okay, so I'm editing it to make it look a little bit closer to what I envisioned, and Scratch allows me to do that. Okay, so now I've completed this item off my checklist. I added a backdrop from the library and I edited it if necessary, right? And you can do the same thing if you want to, or you can leave it the way it is. It's up to you. But I do suggest you experiment with this because it's a cool thing to know how to do. Let's go back to our checklist. We're almost done because once we get through the backdrops, the next part will be really easy. The next one says to upload a backdrop from the internet and call it backdrop 3. Okay. So this one can be a little bit problematic. Now, I'm recording this lesson from a Dell laptop, okay? So if you're working from a Chromebook, your process is going to be slightly different, but the steps are generally going to be the same. It's just going to look a little bit different. So if we go back to Scratch, whenever we go to choose a backdrop, remember we can do it here or we can do it here. We have other options. If we go all the way up here to the top, we can also upload a backdrop. And this is maybe an image that we have from a different program, like maybe you use painting software and you have something really cool that you created there that you want to use in a project, or you can even go online and just find pictures that other people have created or taken for you to use for a project. But this is the button we're going to be using. Before I use that though, I want to go online. I want to try to find some pictures. For this last one, I want to use a picture that's like realistic, okay? So I'm actually going to image search in Google. I'm going to look for an underwater scene. Okay, and whenever I look, I've got a lot of cool options, okay? I want to look for something that's a little bit realistic. I think I like this one right here. It's not exactly like what I did, but it has some of the same elements. So I'm going to use it. All right. So I have this picture right here. In order to use this in my project, the first thing I'm going to have to do is save it. So you're going to have to right click. And if you're on a Chromebook, you're using 2 fingers to touch your trackpad. And you're going to see some options pop up. The option you want to select is Save Image As. You need to be careful that you are not saving link as, because that's not going to work. You have to make sure that you're clicking on Save Image As. And whenever you do, it's going to pull up a box. And again, on a Chromebook, it's going to look a little bit different if you're using a Chromebook. All right. And it's going to allow you to, and yours will look different on a Chromebook, but it'll allow you to type in a name for your image, a file and name, and then to go ahead and click Save. So for mine, I'm going to call it Under the Sea, so it'll be easy for me to find. It's on my desktop. All right. Now, whenever I go back to Scratch, I'll be able to go down here to this button, and I'll be able to go to the Upload Backdrop button. And once I click on it, it's going to pull up a dialog box. Yours will look different on a Chromebook, but you should see your file there. For me, I have a million files on my computer, so I'm going to look for it. There it is, Under the Sea. And it's going to go ahead and pop up right there. So now I have that picture as my backdrop. Now, one thing you might notice whenever you add one that you found online, like you upload a picture, is that it is not the size of the stage. You can see that this is smaller than my stage, so I have this weird white border around the outside. So to fix that, you're going to want to convert to vector, okay? And the reason why we want to do that is because we need to use our select tool so that we can click on the image and then use the handles around it like we would in Tinkercad to stretch it out. All right, so if I click on the image, I'll be able to use the handles in the corner to go ahead and stretch it out. And I just keep stretching it and, kind of moving it until it looks like it's the right size. All right, and there we go. Okay, so remember, I want to title this one Backdrop 3. And there we go. We're good to go. Okay, so if we go back to our checklist, we've completed the first 4. We've titled our assignment, we painted a backdrop, selected a backdrop from the library, and uploaded one from the internet. Now, if you look at the next few items, they are to now work on sprites and costumes. So now that we have our 3 backdrops, now we want to take our little creature that lives under the sea and create it basically using the exact same methods. So if I go back to Scratch, now that I have these backdrops, I'm going to select the one that is my favorite. And I think this one out of all of them is my favorite. All right, so I'm going to select this one. I am going to now add a sprite. So if we look at our checklist, it says paint a sprite using the paint tools in Scratch, call it costume 1. So I'm going to do just like I did before. This time I'm using this button, okay? Backdrops are added here, but sprites are added here. And I'm going to paint a new sprite, and I'm going to call it Costume 1, which it is already named Costume 1. For my Costume 1, I picked a jellyfish. So I'm going to, first of all, convert to bitmap because I'm painting. And then I'm going to use the tools here to create my jellyfish. Oh, I don't like that. I think I want it to be a solid color. Oops. Do it like this. All right. And then I'm going to use the paintbrush tool to create the jellyfish arms. Okay. And there is my jellyfish. All right. If you look at the next one, it says that I'm going to now create a new costume for your sprite from the Scratch library. Edit it if necessary and call it costume 2. So if I go back to Scratch, now I do not want to go over here to choose a new sprite because I don't want a new sprite. I want a new appearance of the sprite I've already created. All right. So I want to go over here and I want to actually choose a costume. So make sure after you add that first sprite, now you're only adding costumes. So for this next one, I want to select it from the library and edit it if necessary. So I'm going to, again, now I'm going to look for a category that works animals because I'm talking about a jellyfish. Let's see if it shows up under animals. And you'll notice that they are alphabetized. So I want to look for the J's. You see there's lots of fish and things like that. And there we have a jellyfish. Oh, we've got all kinds. We got jellyfish A, B, and C. If you're having a hard time finding your creature, remember you can choose something that kind of looks like it and edit it, or you can just choose something completely different for this one if it becomes too much of an issue. So here's my jellyfish. Looks pretty good. Now, the jellyfish that I envisioned was purple. So right there, we'll see it, purple. So I'm going to edit it by changing its color. So I'm going to stay in vector mode, and I am going to use the paintbrush tool or the paint bucket tool to add some color to my jellyfish. And I'm just painting like this. Okay, very cool. So I've done a little bit of editing and I'm done. I want to make sure I title this one Costume 2. Now you'll notice I still only have one sprite. I'm not adding 3 sprites. I'm adding one sprite that has 1, 2, it'll have 3 costumes. So again, that last one is to upload a new costume for your sprite from the internet and call it costume 3. So just like before, I'm going to look for a picture of a jellyfish. Now I'm going to give you a hint for this last one. For the last one, you want to search for whatever it is you're looking for, in my case, jellyfish. And you want to look for a jellyfish with a transparent background. I'm going to show you why in a second here. So let's say I'm looking at pictures of jellyfish, and let's say I decided, we'll say which one. Let's say I decided this one was really cool. It's kind of purple. I think it looks awesome. I want to use this one. So I'm going to go through the process, and I'm going to save my image. All right, and I'm going to call it jellyfish 1, JF1. All right, it's saved on my desktop. So I'm going to go here to add a costume, and I'm going to upload it. I'm going to look for JF1. Now look at what happens whenever I add this new costume to my project. You'll notice that it has a background on it, which is problematic because that covers up my backdrop that I created for my project. I don't want it to do that. I just want the jellyfish. I don't want the water that's in the background in my project. So to fix this, I have a couple of options. I can try to use the paint bucket. And instead of selecting a color, I can select down here, there's a white box with a red line through it. This is invisible, okay? So I can try to select invisible and try to paint with my paint bucket, but you'll see that it's not a solid color, so it's not really going to work very well. It's not deleting a lot at a time. My only other option is to use the eraser tool and to slowly go the whole way around the entire outside of the jellyfish using the eraser and erase all of the background, right? And if I do that, you know, it's going to be time consuming, but it will work, okay? If you don't have the patience for that or you don't wish to do that, let me show you a different method that works. So it has to do with image selection. So instead of looking for just a picture of a jellyfish, you want to look for jellyfish with a transparent or see-through background. And it's going to pull up a specific type of image that has a transparent background. So what you're looking for is a picture under your image results that looks like it has a white background, okay? But whenever you click on it, you see checker marks. So you'll see here, it looks like it has a transparent background in the thumbnail, but whenever I click on it, it has these checker marks. So you can see different ones. This one right here is an imposter. It doesn't actually have a transparent background because we can see the checker marks here. So it has to look like it's white in the thumbnail in the background, and only see checker marks whenever we click on it to see it up close. So this one looks pretty good. All right, it's white background here, checker marks here. I'm going to go ahead and save this one. I'm going to call it Jellyfish 2 or JF2. And then I want you to see what happens whenever I add this one to my project. So again, I go up here to upload, look for Jellyfish 2. Okay, so now you can see whenever I add it to my project, it is just going to have the jellyfish. Nothing in the background, it's just a jellyfish, and that is it. I'm going to title this Costume 3. And then we have completed all of the major items on our checklist up to here. So now we only have 2 items. We share our project by clicking on the orange share button, and we add the link to the assignment and turn it in. So I show you how to do this in the video that's attached to the assignment, but the kind of short version is there's a button up here at the top that says share. If you do not see it, please go to the assignment and watch the video to see how to proceed. But this is basically it. It's going to take you to a page that will allow you to copy a link, and that link is what you turn in on Google Classroom, and it allows me to open up and view your project for myself. So again, just to recap, you should have 1 sprite with 3 costumes, and you should have 3 different backdrops in your project. For both of them, one should be painted by you, one of them should be coming from the library, and one of them should be uploaded from something you found online. And that is assignment number 2 in a nutshell. If you have any questions, reach out to me via email and I can try my best to help you. I might be able to do maybe a little workshop over the weekend where some kids have questions. I can help you out with those and we can troubleshoot it. But I think once you get started, you'll kind of enjoy it. It's a cool way to showcase your creativity. So that is it. If you have any questions, reach out. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with.